Welcome to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And this is our hate week episode because I got a feeling that there's going to be a lot of hate. It's going to be a great episode. I don't think I've been more excited about an episode rather than this one, especially just with how everything played out. And it's not that I think that we're going to disagree on some things, but I think it's good to just see the other perspective.
Yeah. I wish we were able to do this like a pre-episode, like a before the rankings were released, and then like a reaction to. But this is the best we got. So
I would have paid to watch the rankings when they came out.
We'll talk about it
in future years. Get more money to be able to have watch parties. But as always, we'll go past and present first. So which one you want?
Let's do present first.
Present. So I think this is someone that maybe you'll definitely know the name. I don't know if you'll know where he went to school.
Great.
Marquez Valdez-Scantling, MVS, with the Chiefs, the wide receiver.
Oh, man. Old Kadarius Toney 2.0.
Yeah, brick for hands. It's funny. He didn't get the opportunity to catch that one by Green Bay. They interfered, but it wasn't like he was going to catch it anyways.
He would have dropped it anyway. I saw this clip. It was just like a whole highlight reel, of just, somebody... But it was just MVS drops, and it was like he's had the opportunity to drop passes from two of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game because he was doing the same thing in Green Bay with Rodgers.
Yeah.
But distraction, digress. I don't know. I want to say Arizona State.
It's not a Pac-12 school.
Okay. That's the best I got. What's the conference?
I don't know. The other hint is
so that it's not a good one.
Well, it is you would recognize the name, and the hint I'll give to you is Alabama played them this year.
Ooh, Chattanooga?
Nope. Think this is where this game changed things.
UCF?
Yes.
South Florida.
South Florida is where MVS went to school.
Okay.
He went to school to NC State beforehand, then transferred to South Florida. He got drafted out of South Florida. But I didn't know where he went to school until I looked it up. And I was like, I'll see where it is. So
you know how Matt Forte is like my obscure, Tulane running back? Arizona State is my obscure running back, wide receiver college because of. Do you remember Derek Hagan?
That doesn't sound.
He really didn't do anything in the pros. He was fantastic at Arizona State though, and he was supposed to be this next big receiver because he was a big body. But I don't know. That one always sticks in my mind. So anytime it's a obscure wide receiver, I think Arizona State or Oregon State.
Oh well,
because Oregon State's actually had they've produced.
Ocho Cinco.
Yeah,
I mean they had him. They've had good guys come out. But
all right, so passed.
All right, this is a good one. School, Florida State.
Okay.
Played for the Cardinals, the Ravens, the 49ers, and the Lions, and then he spent the practice squad offseason with the Bills and retired from there.
Florida State, Cardinals,
Ravens,
49ers,
Lions.
Oof. Offensive
guy, was taken in 2003 in the second round with the 54th overall pick.
I want to say another wide receiver.
It was a wide receiver. This, for me, I guess this is it may give it away. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. He's up for it this year. I think he's one of the most undervalued guys during his time period.
Ooh,
and
Hall
was
of Fame.
Yeah, when we'll see if you agree with that sentiment. I just think that this dude consistently performed.
Anquan Bolden?
Yeah, that's it. Oh, great pull.
Wow.
I didn't know he went to Florida State until I looked it up. That's actually the next jersey I have on the way. I ordered an Anquan Bolden Cardinals jersey for.
I don't remember him going
us.
to the Lions or the Bills.
I remember him in a picture with the Lions, but that's it. I remember him with the Cardinals, especially with the Ravens and with the 49ers. He was a part of the Super Bowl team, I believe, with Kaepernick.
Was that the Jameis year? Was he there with Jameis?
With Jameis.
Or was that earlier?
What are you talking about?
When Jameis won the Heisman?
No, that was he came out of college in 2003. Jameis was like, I want to say 2013, because he got drafted ahead of Mariota.
Way older than Jameis.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was 2013 draft or 2014 draft, because Jameis went 1 and Mariota went 2.
That makes sense.
And Mariota had just won the Heisman that year and got dropped by Florida State in the playoffs, which I think is the reason I picked Anquan is
fitting.
Because Florida State. So there's a ton of stuff to talk about today, and so I'll give it up to you. Do you want to go through the conference championship games, or do you just want to get right into it with the rankings?
Let's just address the elephant in the room that doesn't belong to be there.
Okay, so with that, I want to ask this, and it's not trying to be a trick question, but it will more highlight like my mindset with the rankings. And I haven't asked, it's funny, I know you guys don't see the behind the scenes. We usually talk a little bit, like just sort of give our initial takes and stuff.
Like a mini production meeting of like, what we're going to do.
Last night we were like, absolutely not. We're not talking about, I want to see genuine reactions. I want genuine, like, first, because he'll say something off the wall sometimes that I'm just like, why did we not say that on the podcast?
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah. And just as a kind of precursor before we get into this, like, I'm not a FSU fan. Like, I couldn't care less about Florida State from like a fan's perspective. So I'm obviously going to take the side of like, I think what happened was wrong, but I don't want it to come across of like, oh, that's because you're an FSU fan, and you're just trying to get your team. I don't care about Florida State. Like, couldn't care less. So just to get out of the way.
And I know I'm a Bama fan, but I at least have text messages to back it up and the picks. I didn't think Alabama was going to win. And I also
go back and watch every episode. You're like one of the most self-deprecating Bama fans, which is a good argument for me, and we'll get into that.
But from there, so my question is, and this is the way I'll frame it, like to build some context. Like you have someone that like truly does love football. They know, you're not trying to explain it to someone with no like intention, but your kid, your son grows up and he's like, hey Dad, like there was the BCS and then it went to the playoffs. And they left the computer system and they went to the committee. Why did they go to the committee? Like, what's the purpose of the committee?
To be honest, like, I don't know. And I think that's the big problem. They will tell you it's because you can't just watch a football game, or in this case, not watch a football game and go purely on statistics, right? We talked about this with the Heisman. The Heisman is not a statistical category to win, right? Like it's not. Now
it's not supposed to.
You kind of need the stats to back it up, but you don't just have to be the best statistically. And again, I think the BCS, although very flawed, because it's a computer, but realize it was a computer who was written. The code was written by somebody who valued certain things, right? He was the one that put. I think if you play in the SEC, your strength of schedule goes up. Like those things get.
Well, it wasn't just the SEC. It was like it took like, hey, what's the rankings?
You get what I'm saying? Yeah. Like there's even though it's a computer, there's still a human element in the BCS of like you're telling it what to look at from a human's perspective, and so I think the reason they went away from that is because from a fan's perspective, there's been plenty of times in history, both sides, by the way, and we can talk about this both ways, but like. Just because someone put up a good stat line doesn't necessarily mean that they're better than another team. And that's kind of what the BCS just looked at, right? Like they looked at certain things where you're like, man, that's just a computer looking at it. But the fans, we see something kind of different. So they created this committee to try to alleviate some of that ambiguity, if you will, which, and we've talked about this before, is legit idea, but when you get these people who are the ones making this decision that aren't truly fans or don't have really any association with college football, how can they possibly make a better decision, right? Like, how are they making a better decision than the BCS when they're not watching all the games and they are not looking at all of the teams all of the time? If anything, that's almost worse than the BCS because you know what I mean? Like,
well, I agree with the whole watching. Like, I saw there was a tweet out that some guy wrote. He was like, the committee's getting the day to watch the games, which is the first time that they've ever watched the game this entire year. Like,
oh yeah, because they were sweating it out.
Oh yeah, like I really do think that the committee honestly wakes up Sunday and they go, let me look at how the games.
Let's look at the box score. Like,
Yeah.
you think they're staying up? You know, they're probably all living on the East Coast. You think they're staying up till 1 a.m. watching Washington play, whoever? Like,
No.
they're not doing it, right? Like, they're not. You know for a fact that they're not. So when these people are in charge of actually making the decision, it's almost worse.
Yeah, and that's what. And the reason I asked the question is like for me, it is you have an expectation, and that sets the reality. You cannot have a reality based upon what you didn't set expectation from. For me, what I always thought the committee's job was to do was to put the best 4 teams in there.
And again, that's what they say. That's what they say they're supposed to do. However, they've proven it time and time again that that's not what they do. And we can talk about all of the reasons why. And again, from a fan's perspective, right? Like this is where I think the split comes. The 4 best teams. Okay, are we going for entertainment here or are we going for sports? Because the 4 best teams don't always make the playoffs. The 4 best teams don't always make the Super Bowl. Like, this is my second point of, like, how small, short-sighted did NCAA have to be and college football to be to make a 4-team playoff with 5 power conferences? Like, right out of the gate, they should have realized that's a terrible idea. Like, did you see that Mike Leach interview from like 2013 or 2012 or whatever? I mean, like, visionary, right? Because again, he's very intimate with the game of football. He knows how the game of football plays out, that the best team doesn't always win or even get a chance for that matter, right? Like, that's not what sports is about. From a guy who's played, and this is why I'm so passionate about it as well, is like all you're told to do is like stay in your lane and control what you can control. And all you can control is to go out every day and win the game. It doesn't matter if it's close. It doesn't matter if it's a rival. Like, at the end of the day, like, all that matters is go out and win the game, and then the records will play out against it. But so again, back to the Mike Leach thing, like, how short-sighted are you to go, hey, we got 5 power conferences. Let's just create 4 spots. Right? Like, how easy could it have been for them from the get-go to just be like, all right, 5 Power 5 conferences. We'll get 5 spots, 1 for each of the champion of the conference, right? And that's another big thing that we'll talk about. And then from there, we'll use the committee to discuss who's 1 through 5, right? Like, that's the only subjectivity that I would think would be legit, right? And you just go, all right, whoever's number 1 gets a bye. These guys all play each other, or something, all right? Like, they could have figured out a way. Maybe they go 6, right? And then the top 2 get it. There's 1 at large, but there's so many other solutions that are better than what they put in place because of this reason. Now, I will give them that what happened this year has been, up until this point, unprecedented.
Correct.
You actually had 5 conferences that were all well-deserving of a spot.
Had a team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that typically hasn't happened before. But again, that's kind of beside the point, right? Like, people are going to talk about, like, oh, the deserving versus 4 best teams. Like, there's only best and deserving. Like, in my mind, it doesn't matter if you win the games. Like, if you don't win the games, there's no deserving about it, right? But, like, I don't care how good anyone thinks they are. If you don't win the games, it doesn't matter, right? Like, for you would pick 4 best teams, right? How do you know which team is better than the next?
And it's tough. We're going to get into this. I will. The thing about the best is, and we can get into this right now. We'll come back to it because I do want to make a point with, I believe the ACC is at fault for what just happened, and I'll prove it here in a second. For me, it's not just about the wins; it's also about the losses. Like,
sure.
And for me, I look at it.
Which Florida State had none.
Florida. I'm not talking about Florida State. I'm talking about Texas.
Okay.
And so my question is, so, Georgia lost to Bama.
Mm-hmm.
Bama lost to Texas. Texas lost to Oklahoma. What's the difference in all those losses outside of the head-to-head?
Oklahoma.
Yeah, Oklahoma was not a Power 5 conference champion. My question is so, like, and that's sort of the thing I haven't heard really anyone discuss. It's like, did it matter who Texas lost to? Like, did it matter the loss? Like, the fact Oklahoma got beat by Oklahoma State, who then went and got the brakes beat off them by UCF, looked terrible against Houston. Like,
should have lost to BYU.
Yeah, should have lost. Like, Oklahoma honestly should have played Texas again, which I think would have helped Texas's argument more that they beat the team that they lost to.
Yeah,
but
they get to avenge it.
Yeah, but the thing about it is like Oklahoma proved throughout the year they were not as good of a football team as people thought. Like, in my thing is like, how do you then weigh the loss? Like,
so this is my perfect example. It's like, how do you know that one team is better than the other? At the end of the day,
you had the head-to-head.
That's it, right? That is it. You don't know.
So would it only have taken a second loss by Texas for you to say they were worse than Bama? Like, that's my question. It's like, because this is like the subjective part, and it's like sort of why I like the BCS method, and we'll get into. I have a great point with that too, but like from the standpoint of like, if all we're going to look at is like the wins and loss column, then it's like, what if like Texas got beat by North Alabama? It's still one loss.
And I completely agree with that. And that's why the transitive property in sports doesn't work, right? It never works. For you watching at home, especially Bama fans, the transitive property.
Whoa now.
You know what I'm talking about though? Like,
yeah.
Just because Texas beat Bama and Bama beat Georgia doesn't mean that Texas is better than Georgia. Like, and we know that. Like,
Correct.
That's not how it works. That's how sports are. However, when you're comparing Bama versus Texas, I'm sorry, Texas won. It doesn't matter what you think is a better team. It doesn't matter what the rest of the resume and all that stuff is. Texas beat Bama. I get what you're going to say. The losses also do have to come into effect, and they will. But the point I'm making is when you're trying to compare 2 or 3 separate teams that haven't all played each other and haven't done all, you cannot say without a doubt definitively that one team is better than the next. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you think because that's an opinion. The only way to figure it out is have them play the game.
I agree. I'm not arguing the head-to-head. Like, and this is not an argument between Texas, Bama. They both had one loss. It was a close loss to Oklahoma. My whole like argument is like, and this goes back to this original question. It's like, well, what's the job of the committee? Is like, if you have a committee, guess what? They're going to be subjective. Like,
fair.
And that's like the whole thing about it is because there's so many things to like unwrap with the rankings. I'll go back to the ACC point. ACC is at fault for this. And so,
because they're trying to get out of
there's three. They formed the alliance, and not a lot of people knew about this. And now that this has happened, it's coming out. So the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 formed what was called the alliance this offseason. They were voting members on the playoff. They said that this year they wanted it to remain a 14 playoff. The SEC and the Big 12 said we want to start the 12-team playoff now. And so
they should have done that.
Yeah, like now Florida State still would have been the only ACC school in. And what's crazy is based upon how it would have played out. They would have played Liberty, who was undefeated, but like they played of all 133 FCS teams, they played the 133rd hardest schedule. So that's why they're undefeated. But Florida State would get them, and then who would they play? They'd play Bama.
Which is fine. Go ahead, keep going.
I'm just saying, like, from that standpoint, like, there has to be, it's one of these ones where it's not me going, ha, but it's more like there are politics within the game throughout all of the conferences that people need to be held accountable for. Florida, I just get laughing with like the senators being like, we're going to sue. And I know what they're going to say. We gave you the chance for a 12-team playoff. Yeah. You could have had this. You voted no, suck an egg. Like, what else do you want? Like, from that standpoint. Then to counter you on the BCS, you don't know this. Found this out, and I've held my tongue, waiting for you to get here to talk to you about this. BCS rankings have been done every year the playoffs have happened. How many times has the BCS system differed from the committee with the teams?
You mean like the BCS is continuing to run?
Yeah, like it's just a system. So like every year, what the BCS would have put out, like shows with the.
I don't. It's probably a small margin. However, I don't know this. I'm just pulling this out. I will counter with. This is why I said the problem with the BCS is that it was programmed by basically the same guys who are on the committee, right? Like, of course it's going to be similar. Those guys that are saying we value this are the same people that put it into the computer. So, of course, when the computer is looking at the same thing that these bozos are looking at, it's going to be a similar outcome. But go ahead. What's the number?
Every single one of the CFP rankings, in terms of the top 4 teams, not in the order.
The final rankings?
The final rankings and the final BCS rankings have been the same, minus 1 year. Minus 1 year. Now,
what year was that?
The order, I'll get to it. It's this one.
Yeah. Oh, shocker.
Oh, wait. It's even better. So, like last year, instead of, I think that both me and you both agreed to this, the rankings were Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Ohio State 3, TCU 4. So, like, I think the BCS got it right. Now, all the opponents have been right for the first years up until this one. BCS rankings this year. Michigan 1, Washington 2. Who was 3?
Probably Bama.
Who was 4?
I don't know. Florida State.
Texas was 5.
That makes sense.
So I look at it and I say, okay, this is where it then translates even more. Like the thing, I'm wanting to see if you agree with this. Bama's catching all the hate right now because they're the number 4 team. And we failed to acknowledge that Texas also jumped Florida State.
Oh, yeah. We'll get in. Like, I've got all that. Like,
okay. I knew Bama was in the second they populated the number 3 team.
Yeah.
Like, when Texas popped up, I go, Bama's in. Because there's no way that they were going to say, like, Florida State was, like, the number 4 team behind Texas, but still in front of Bama. Like, just because of, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how the rankings are done. It's either the 3 undefeateds are up top or they're not. Like,
so this is my biggest problem. And again, this is why I can see. Now, we'll go back to the BCS thing. Like, there's a reason we want to be away from the BCS because we thought it got it wrong a lot, right? Like, there's a reason we did that.
I was shocked. I did not know that it had got it, like, every year had been the same thing up until this year. But that was surprising.
Which, again, I hate on the committee. I don't like the committee. I wish we didn't have a committee. However, I would hate to be in their shoes. I don't envy them because, again, the system we put in place is idiotic for the sport that is being played. It doesn't make sense for how we do this. You introduce so much subjectivity, like you talked about, which at some point I get it. Because you have a committee, there's going to be some subjectivity. However, inside of that subjectivity, there has to be some objectivity, right? Like, the rules that they set out have to be followed. And you have documented it well on this show that they don't do that. And that's the biggest problem with what happened, is that they move the goalpost in whichever way they feel like going that week. And it's just ruining it, right?
What even showed up the fact that they docked Florida State behind Texas and Alabama, but then still put them in front of Georgia.
Yeah, right. Like that's a huge thing that I think is getting overlooked. Is like, how do you say that? How do you go? You know why? It's because once they got after the top 4, they're just like, whew. Like, and it doesn't matter.
Let's not make them mad by dropping them all the way down to 10.
Let's just put them at 5 and tell them they're the first one out. Like, that's good. That's a ridiculous stat.
Yes.
To think that the number 1 team in the nation, right? Like, you're penalizing Florida State heavily for Jordan Travis being out, right? Heavily. Obviously, you drop them out. We'll talk about some of the nuances there. But you think the Jordan Travis injury is so significant that they're going to fall. But then this team who back-to-back national champions, 29 straight, undefeated, loses one game to Alabama, and somehow that makes them the 6th team? Like, what this is where I'm just, it's just bonkers. Like, whatever they're doing doesn't make sense on any stretch of the imagination. Like, even figure skating and gymnastics, probably the most subjective judging in, all of sports, they at least have objective. I don't know if you know how they do their scores.
I don't know how they do their scores.
The way they do their scores is the athlete, whatever we'll call it, the gymnast gives the judges the routine ahead of time. They say, these are all the moves I'm going to do. This is my strength of schedule. And the judges go, that's a hard move, that's a hard move, that's an easy move, that's a hard move. Based on what you told us you're going to do, the most points you can get out of 10 is 9.5. That's how they do it. And then if the athlete nails it, they go, boom, 9.5. And everybody's like, why did they get a 10? They nailed it. Well, their strength of schedule wasn't that hard. The most they could get is a 9.5, right? And as they stumble or do whatever, it goes down from there. So if that's how they wanted to do it, going into now that wouldn't work because strength of schedule changes every week, but there's at least some objectivity built into the subjectivity, right? And the committee doesn't follow any of that. Here's one of my best points. So if their job, and this is what they're saying, this is what their fallback is. It's our job to put the 4 best teams in. Okay? So is it not your job throughout all of the rankings to say who the best 4 teams is?
100%, because they didn't drop Florida State after he went down.
So why was Florida State number 3 to start the week? Because you thought they were one of the 4 best teams. They go out and win their game, and somehow that makes them a worse team? What logic are we using there? How does that make any sense?
It was poor because it set them up for failure.
Yeah.
As the committee.
They knew going into that weekend that they were going to drop Florida State out. Unless, and I want you to think about this. I want to get your reaction, and I want everybody to think about this at home. What if Georgia beat Bama?
Well, that's the thing with them putting Texas ahead.
Right.
It's like
this is what I think happened. This is literally what I think happened.
I don't think they thought Bama was going to win.
Exactly. This is what I think happened. When Bama won, the committee was like, "Oh shoot, we have to put Bama in. Bama's an SEC champion.
But we can't put Texas in.
If we put Bama in, we have to put Texas in. We can't put Bama in and leave Texas out because, again, that wouldn't make sense. And it's unfathomable to them to not have an SEC team in. Unfathomable, right? They could not do it. They have to have an SEC person, an SEC team in the playoff. They have to. Because Bama won, they were like, shoot, we got to put Bama in. Shoot. That means we got to put Texas in. How do we justify this? Well, it's the 4 best teams. The quarterback got hurt. Well, that's funny because when the quarterback got hurt and they continue winning games, you didn't punish them then.
Well, they won one. It was just it's still they won.
Now,
I'm not taking away
which brings me to my second point. Isn't that a better testament to the team that you can lose this all-knowing God of a player and still go out and win games? Not only with just a backup, but a third string?
I agree. Now, I will say...
Isn't that a better testament to how good the team actually is?
Florida State's defense, I would argue, is probably the best in college football, especially what they showed. Now, I get, because there's 2 sides to the argument. It's like, yes, they won. It was against a terrible Florida team. Now, it was still in Gainesville and against Louisville. I mean, it's funny.
With a backup, though.
With a backup. No, I'm not trying to take anything away from Florida State. I'm just pointing out that the level of competition was not the same. Like, in my heart of hearts, if Clemson had played them again there in the ACC championship, Clemson wins. Like, if it had just been a better opponent, I think that they lose that game. But at the same time, I'll never know. Like, we can only judge what we saw on the field.
Right. We talked about this.
Yeah.
Oklahoma versus Boise State.
Yes.
You play that game 10 times, Oklahoma probably wins 9.5 of them, right? You know what I mean? But that's why you play the game. And I get it. Because you could make that argument for 100 games this season. Auburn and Alabama. It took a last-second Hail Mary for Alabama to beat Auburn. But it's a rivalry game, right? And it doesn't matter because all that matters is that you won, right?
Correct.
We're talking about level of competition. Auburn's a barely bowl eligible team who got curb stomped by New Mexico State, and Bama struggled to beat them. How can you say definitively that Alabama's better?
I think that it's different, and that's the problem. Is like anytime you get under this, and this is the thing, it becomes subjective.
But it shouldn't. That's the problem.
Well, the reason I think it's subjective, and this is like a great point to the different. Like, why does pro football not suffer from the exact same thing that college suffers from?
Because they don't allow this subjectivity.
Well, it's controlled, and the reason for it is that you have divisions that have to play one another. They have to play each team in their division twice.
Yep.
And then every team in that division gets selected these specific divisions that they cross-rival play. So, if the Jets are playing the Bills if like the Browns are going to play the Jets, the Browns are also playing the Bills, the Patriots, and the Dolphins in the year. Like, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
That way you have
a little more cross communication of the schedules. I get it.
And so it's controlled. And I really think that if we stayed in a 14 playoff, that what would happen after this year is that the conferences would become more super in terms of bigger teams, and they would just say, we are no longer playing non-conference. We are going to play our conference, and if whoever comes out, you guys can then debate what happened. But the cross, like,
that's what I've been a proponent for a long time.
Yes.
Of just like, get all these cupcake games out of the way, because like, how can you tell whether Georgia's better than Bama when Georgia's playing Ball State?
Correct.
Like, you just can't. Like, it's not the same level of competition. There's so many variables involved. Like, at the end of the day, and this is what every other sport does, it doesn't matter who you played, what at the end of the day, win your conference and you're in, right? Like, you just got to get the wins and go in. I don't care how good or bad anyone thinks you are.
And that would be Bama's argument, is that they were undefeated in the SEC.
And that's a great point.
And Texas, on the other hand, yes, they beat Bama, but Texas was not undefeated in the Big 12. Like, you lost a game in your own conference. Like, and it's this catch-22, because it's like, hey, like, Bama would use it to their advantage if they had won the game. It's a disadvantage because they lost, but it's one of these ones like Georgia didn't play an out-of-conference opponent, but Georgia went undefeated, and they're looked at as the number one team.
So if there was any subjectivity this year, the only subjectivity that should have been discussed is Michigan 1, Washington 2, Florida State 3. Who's that fourth player?
Correct.
Who's that? And that's the only subjectivity that I think should have been allowed. Like, and people would have gotten mad. And what part of the reason I feel like they're doing it is because they're trying to protect themselves from last year.
Yes.
The TCU debacle. And now listen. For all those people like, oh, it was so bad. I heard Stephen A. Smith talk about it. They got destroyed by Georgia. I get it. I watched the game too. And was I disappointed? Absolutely.
But they skip over the fact they beat Michigan.
They beat Michigan.
Yes.
Right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry. Like, do I think TCU should have been in there? No. Why? Because they didn't even win their conference. But at the end of the day, they beat the Big Ten championship. Right?
And what do we need to take from this? Michigan screwed this up. Like Michigan just win.
But it goes to the fact of, like, that's why you play the game. And, like, it's silly to me when you go, well, Michigan won and they were undefeated, and everybody doesn't question it. Yep, they're number one. Why? Why are they such an easy number one team? Washington wins and they're in. They're undefeated. Pac-12 champ. They're number two. Easy. No one even debated that fact. How all of a sudden, when you get to the next team who's in the exact same position, undefeated, won their conference, how is it all of a sudden like, well, maybe we don't want them in there?
Now, I will,
because they're trying to protect themselves from last year TCU.
I will say that in the governing doctrines of the CFP committee, there is a clause that says, player availability. Now, whether or not that's right or wrong.
I totally get it. But why didn't they then apply that the instant Jordan Travis went down?
10,000%.
Thank you.
10,000. I'm not arguing that in the least. They should have at least, in my opinion, based upon how highly the committee thought, because I think of what I'm about to say, The committee did not think Bama was going to win, but the committee thought Oregon was going to win the game.
And which brings me to my point. Vegas had Oregon at a 9.5-point favorite. They thought Oregon was better. Guess what? Washington won the game. That's why whatever you think about who's a better team means zero. You and I have played this game all year. What's our record in picking outcomes? It's better than most, but we're not always right.
Correct.
That's what sports are. I'm sorry, that's what sports are. You play the game to figure out who's a better team that given day. Not like, in this general sense of we think they're a better team. Of course. And if that's the route we're going, then why isn't Georgia being discussed? You're telling me that Georgia, again, back-to-back national championships, 29 straight, their only losses to Alabama, why aren't they being discussed? You can definitively tell me, committee, that Georgia is worse than Florida State and Texas and Washington? Like, if anything, Georgia should, if we're doing that, if we're going 4 best teams, Georgia should be up there.
What this highlighted was, and it's funny because it's the last year, but it's also, I think that what this should do is it should send up red flags, because what everyone's going to say is, well, the next year we don't have to worry about this. False.
Yeah, if anything,
false.
It's going to introduce more subjectivity because they have more spots to screw it up with.
For example, like, what were the playoff? So I took a screenshot of it just to be able to factually say this, because I thought it was a good point. Is so you'd have the top 4 teams: Michigan, Bama, Texas, Washington. Liberty plays Florida State. The winner plays Alabama. Missouri and Oregon play. The winner plays Michigan. Then you have Ole Miss play Georgia. Winner plays Texas. Penn State plays Ohio State. Winner plays Washington. If you think that the committee would have allowed Georgia to replay Ole Miss or Penn State to replay Ohio State, you're crazy. Yeah. Why? Because it's a money thing. Like, they're going to change up those teams, and that's why they've already said they're trying to get rid of this 5th buy-in, because no one wants to go watch Liberty go get smoked, because that's what's going to happen. Like, it talk about a boat race, that's what it would be. It would be a murderous thing. The games that we saw played all year with you said it perfectly, that all about 15 to 25 in the top 25 is it's just SEC or any really Power 12 school or Power 5 school that just gets rotated in and out to justify the rankings of the top 15. That's all that it's for. Like, the fact, I laugh at the Liberty, like, because this is a subjectivity, but I think I'm not saying this like believing this. It's more just like this is the committee's thing of Liberty's undefeated. Why are they not talked about it? And they go, well, they didn't play in the Power 5. And I'm like, so what? How can you prove that this team's better or worse? And then you see people struggle with how they answer. Like, that's the problem, is you have people on this committee. And the other problem with the committee is the lack of transparency. Like, it's like a closed door thing in the Capitol. Like, anytime they're like, hey, we're going behind closed doors. Yeah, we voted and this team won. You're like, well, what was the vote? Behind closed doors. And you're like, well, I don't know. I want to know what happened.
Which kind of brings me back to my original point of, like, what if Georgia won? It makes it really easy for the committee to just go up. We had the 4 top teams there. We were right. They all won their conference. Sorry, Bama and Texas. We just thought these teams were better throughout the season. Like, if Georgia wins, there's no chance they jump Texas over Florida State.
Texas. If Georgia wins,
it's Georgia, Michigan, Washington, Florida State.
You mean no way that Texas jumps Florida State?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I say that backwards?
Yeah, I thought you said if Georgia jumps. I was like, no, Georgia would win.
If Georgia wins, it's real easy for them to just keep it exactly as is. And I would bet money that's what would have been the outcome.
And for anyone that says we said anything other, the last week when I did this episode, I said exactly that the committee hopes that the top 4 just win, because it would be the cleanest way for them to just say these teams won. The only other one that was going to be super clean is if Oregon had beaten Washington, because you beat the team that beat you. It would have been so simple. I still think Florida State would have been 3 in that scenario. I think that they would have done everything in their power, though,
to put Oregon in?
To put Oregon ahead of Washington's, to put Oregon State above Florida State, or excuse me, not Oregon State, Oregon above Florida State, so that Georgia had the easier road. that
So it would have been Georgia,
Playing-
Michigan, Oregon, Florida State?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
like I think that's how the committee would have ranked it if Oregon had won, just because then it's like, hey, who's the better team? Oregon is, because their quarterback's healthy.
Yeah.
And I don't think people would have really ever batted an eye to that. But the fact that they were undefeated and got left out, like that's where people were hung up. And I get it. It's a huge piece. Like they were undefeated. My question is, let's say that Bama doesn't, or let's say Texas is undefeated. And so now you have 5. How then do you break it down?
And again, that's the original point I made. The system that we put in place, knowing that you have Power 5 conferences, it was idiotic. Like you were so short-sighted in creating this thing that it screwed it up. Now, we've never gotten to that point, right? This has probably been one of the more difficult. Last year was pretty difficult, and then this year probably even more difficult because of the teams deserving. But yeah, if you ran into that, I don't know. And that's why I say I don't envy to be them. However, I would have never put this system in place. It's a terrible system.
So for me, this is sort of like, I have 2 different ideas. This one just I talked about it. I annoyed my wife yesterday by talking for a 40-minute drive. I was like, this is the idea I have. I think it's great. I think we talked about this a little bit before. The last 12 different independent teams to have won a national championship have a former player that serves on the committee. And that is what the committee is made up of.
We
Since there's 12 teams, you have 12 different players. When that new team wins, that bottom team's pushed out. But like, I think the bottom team right now is Michigan, because that's the last of the 12 individual teams. They won in 97. If Michigan were to win this year, they go back to the top. So they'd have to have, 12 different teams win before they ever got knocked out. But it's one of these ones where it's like, if you sit back and I think what should happen is the fans should vote. The fans should get a vote of who their former player is to like, and you know what? If you want people to go out and vote in the general election, I guarantee you that if you put this on a card, people will be like, I'm going to the polls today.
Yeah.
Like they're not missing this. Like I'm voting for my player. I get that it would be, you got Florida, LSU, Bama. I mean, it's a lot. Georgia, you have a lot of SEC teams that would be represented here. If you think that Tim Tebow is going to be sitting there going, Bama did lose the head-to-head, but I really think they got better. I think they should. Like, there's going to be no hater more.
I get it.
And the fact that throughout the whole year, and I've never heard about this at any point with the committee, look at how, upset we are. We're friends. The fact that I've never heard people saying they came out of the committee room going, there were fists thrown, we had to separate people.
I found out something this weekend that I didn't know about. Apparently, when their school is being talked about, they have to leave the room. How silly is that?
But at the same time, Michigan, and this is the thing I sit back, I thought Florida State was going to get in because when they discuss where Florida State should fall, Michigan's athletic director's on the board. Like, who do you think he voted for?
Oh, yeah, he wants Florida State to play.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to play with Bama.
I mean, you saw the Michigan players react.
I mean, back to your scenario, if Texas was undefeated, the top 4 would probably be Michigan, Washington, Texas, Florida State. And people aren't going to like it, but, you leave the SEC out in that situation.
Oh, you leave Georgia out.
Oh, you said if Georgia was undefeated too?
You got,
I thought you meant if Bama wins.
Georgia, Michigan,
okay.
Washington,
that's
Florida State, and Texas.
That's a different.
Each of the Power 5 conferences. But this is in my opinion, this is sort of the second way to fix the committee. Because this is the nightmare scenario. And it's how do you break it down? I think that what it should be is we should have some different factors. 20% of your matrix is what's your opponent's record? The teams that you play this year, what's their win and losses? Be actually able to judge. I don't care that you played in the SEC. If you played terrible teams all year and, Texas played better teams, then they should get a higher rating than you.
That's my biggest thing about, again, I know people think I'm an SEC hater, but, a lot of the SEC fans, they play both sides of the ball, right? They go, oh, we're in the best conference. It just means more. And then when they lose, they go, well, it's because it's a harder conference. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, but like, if you want to be able to use that for your benefit to say that it's a harder conference, you also can't then get mad when you lose in that harder conference.
We didn't use it. Bobby Bowden used
Whatever. You know, I'm just saying, like, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like, you think the Jets and the Bills are just like, this isn't fair. The Patriots are in a division. We would be better if we were in a different. I'm sorry. That's the division you're in. And if that's the case, it's 2023. Apparently, you just swap conferences whenever you want.
I agree with that. And we were talking about it earlier. The whole Bobby Bowden joke is back in 1992, Florida State was offered to come into the SEC, and Bobby Bowden on record was like, that's a way too tough of a road to hoe.
I like to win games.
Yeah. It's like, no, we're going to stay in the ACC. From the standpoint of the win-loss, SEC, and this is what's funny, Bama played tougher, had a better win-loss of their opponents. Florida State, of all the teams, was dead last. All their components combined had a losing record. But you also have to sit back and look at Florida State and say they did play two SEC teams, beat them both. One of which is probably, in my opinion, it's not that I don't think he deserves it. We can get to a Heisman talk here in a minute. But Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, is going to be the Heisman Trophy winner. So They beat the Heisman Trophy winner on opening night, the biggest game.
And it was a good victory. Like,
yes.
It was not like a close squeak out. They beat them.
Beat them well.
Yeah.
Then they beat Florida with a backup QB in Gainesville. Like, because I am a believer, like, in the fact that when you go to an opponent's team and you have to play at night, it's a tough game. Like, that's why it's funny. I talked about it every time. It's like you going to Corvallis with Oregon State. Like, there are demons in those places.
Yeah.
Like, when you go and if it's close when the lights come on, like going in the second half, dude, buckle up. Like, I lose hair. I probably lost years of my life watching the Iron Bowl at Auburn at night because it's just you give a team hope.
I think what I wish they did more often is they took the team name out of resume looks, right? Because if you compared the two and you went, all right, you have the number 4 team in the nation, which everybody knows who it is, but like if you just said you have let's just call it this. You have 2 teams. They're both playing for a conference championship. Okay? They're both playing for a conference championship. Team A is higher ranked right now than Team B. Team A is undefeated. Team B has 1 loss. Team A is also playing an opponent who is higher ranked than Team B's opponent. But they both win. Who's the better team? Team A, right?
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind says Team B. Not a chance. Nobody in the history of anybody says Team B is better than Team A. There's no stat anywhere in that comparison that says Team B is better than Team A. You know who Team A and Team B are? Florida State and Texas. I get it. Texas looked good against Oklahoma State. They beat the brakes off them. But it was Oklahoma State. The 3-loss Oklahoma State, who was ranked like 18th or something like that.
And they shouldn't even been ranked that.
Yeah. Because they were getting curb stomped by BYU, right? But brings you back to my point. Why was Oklahoma State even in that game? Because they won. They came back and won against BYU. Therefore, they get to go. I'm sorry. That's the way sports are. You win the game, you get to go.
I agree. I think the thing to sort of summarize this, because I know we've been ranting for a minute, is it is an impossible situation when you give a committee free rein. Like, and that's what, like, ultimately, America got exactly what it deserved because this is what you allowed. Like, it's why I asked the question of, and I think that you answered it the best way that I didn't even tell you how to answer it. Like, we didn't even talk about that. So you answered it the best way I think you know how. Who knows? Like, you don't know. And it's because of exactly, like, you even saw it in the final rankings with Florida State, Georgia. It's like the same thing that you use to knock a team down in Florida State, you still then put them above a Georgia team. That Georgia's favored by -14.
Yeah.
You, like, sit back and go, what world did that make any sense?
It doesn't.
The only thing that I can sit back is, I'm not sure if anyone, I'm sure that people who are listening to this have probably heard it because if you're listening to us, you really love football, is the Florida State payback.
Oh, yeah. Like,
dude, that is the funniest thing in the world.
Boycotting the game?
Yes. And the thing, so the whole boycott plan was to not say they're going to boycott right now. It's to, go down the
Take
South
all the
Beach.
bennies, have fun, do everything you want, and then when it comes to game time, you just go, not playing.
And not just come to game time, like fully dress out, get on the sideline. They, do the coin flip. Oh, yeah, cool. Go over the sideline. They're like, okay, get on the field. They're like, no, we're good. And when like you said, when Kurt Herbstreit and they go down the Molly Road, and they're like, hey, what's going on? You just go, we were told that it mattered to play the game, but clearly it didn't. So we're just not going to play. Y'all figure it out and walk off the field and watch ESPN lose it. Like, I think the only reason that doesn't happen is because, honestly, I think that at the end of the ESPN would probably be like, everyone at Florida State, it's a NCAA would do the death penalty. They would erase the school. They'd be like, you're no longer the Seminoles. That's a hate crime.
Yeah.
Like, we're charging all you guys. Like, they would lose their minds. They would absolutely lose their minds.
What kind of Mickey Mouse organization is this?
Oh, you're owned by Disney. It's true. But that is, to me, where the 12, and this is like where I sort of like transition to, like, it's not going to get better next year.
The only unforeseen benefit about next year is that the Pac-12 dissolved. When they were creating this, hey, we're expanding to 12, they didn't know that the Pac-12 was going to dissolve. That helps a little bit, simply because now it's just, all right, now we got 4 power conferences, 4 spots for those buys. That makes it clean and easy. But again, they could have put something in place way back when to make it easier than, because I have
what Mike Leach said is exactly true. If you haven't watched the conversation, that's what he talks about. He's like, what type of idiots made a system that you have 5 conferences and 4 spots,
and then a committee to talk about it, with, again, people that aren't even necessarily associated with football.
And even if they are associated, it's like, that's why I said a former player. Like, I get that they're still going to be a representative of their school, and there should be some buy. I just say that because I think there should be buy-in of people that win. Like, I'm sorry, but Colorado State doesn't have a dog in the fight. Like, they shouldn't have an opinion on what the playoff looks like, because guess what? You ain't won. Like, sorry, dude, kick rocks. You don't get a vote on this committee. Like, it pays to win. Like, it really does. But from the standpoint of there's having an athletic director who also, like, understands money, and, like, I'm sorry, but, like, if you think the athletic directors aren't meeting with the head of their own conferences and understand the conference plays and, like, even future scheduling, future money problems, like, they understand where everything's at, and the fact that they were just, like, oblivious to it, and they're like, oh, well, no, I really think it comes down to this team. You're crazy. Like, no organization works like that. No organization. And the idea that that's the biggest gripe I have, and I'm willing to say this at Bamford, I know 100% that they did not watch games throughout the year.
Yes.
Like, there's no way that they stayed up.
Every single person on the committee watched every single game of all of those teams.
Correct.
No chance.
No chance. No. It's funny because I know me and you stayed up to watch, like, USC play Washington. Dude, the game ended at 2 a.m. in the morning. I did it to run a stupid podcast. Like, and I love football. The idea, I looked at that picture. It looked like a bunch of old white dudes, like, in their 80s, sitting around a golf course.
You know, they're asleep by 7 p.m. every night.
100%. Like, I was like, I know you didn't watch the game. Like, you woke up and looked at the box score and you go, how did the USC barely, Washington struggled or something? Like, that's the thing that, like, drives me crazy. It's like, there's no accountability for that. Like, there's no accountability for the fact that it's like, did you even pay attention? Like,
so let me pose this question to you as well. What if, and this is real hypothetical, and it'd be hard to even, I mean, it's impossible to prove, again, kind of like everything else I talked about, but what if Jalen Milroe goes down? And what if Bama still wins that game? Now, again, highly, highly unlikely, but do you think they leave Bama out still?
The better question I heard was, what if Georgia had won but lost their starting quarterback? Would they have done the same with any of the other top teams? Would they have done it with them?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
And that's that's the answer right there. Like, there's no other discussion that needs to be had with that right there.
Now, my question for you is, now this is outside of the playoff. I just want you to just answer this truthfully. Is Florida State right now a top 10 team in terms of, like, if you had to bet money on who's going to win a game, where would Florida State fall for you?
Top 10? Yeah, I think so.
Who would you put in front of them? Like, would Georgia be in the top 4 that's currently there? Would you still have them beating Florida State on a neutral field? Michigan.
Honestly, the only one that I think would be close, I think a Texas-Florida State game would be close, and I think a Washington-Florida State game would be close.
Okay.
The other 3, I think I would, not like definitively, but I would, probably say, yeah, hands down, I think they're better than Florida State.
The only way Florida State stays in the games, in my opinion, is the exact same way they stayed in the Florida and Louisville's game. Their defense is tremendous.
Which again, I mean,
their biggest issue is against, like, when it came to throwing the football, like, they struggle more than Iowa did. But
it was a third string quarterback.
No. I'm not arguing that. I'm just, has nothing to do with the playoffs. It's like just talking football. Like, are they a good team? Like,
but we've seen teams in the past who are really, really good that strive off their defense.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that in 2 games, they really struggled offensively.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I'm trying
Understandably.
to say. Yes, they had a third string quarterback. The reason I ask this is there is a debate this year, like, because they did struggle.
Did you watch the Florida State game?
Yes. Like,
that was the best I've ever seen Florida play all season.
100%. Florida,
like, they were playing for a bowl game because they're not bowl eligible.
If Florida, now this is it goes both ways. Like, this is why it's always catch-22. If Florida State's starter hadn't gotten hurt, Florida wins that game. Like, he got hurt the week prior, and they were on a backup.
Florida's
QB was hurt the week prior. If Florida had, and that's what they almost beat Missouri, and then
because that backup came in and was amazing.
Yes, and he just struggled against.
And then he did struggle against Florida State, which again I think is a testament how good Florida State's defense is.
Yeah. Oh, Florida State's defense. I'm not going to sit back and tell you. I think that they're the number 1 defense in college football right now.
I think they're number 2 behind Michigan, but it's close.
Their ends are so. Florida State's ends are amazing.
They're great.
Like, a good end transforms a defense, like, because it negates the guy that always has the ball, the quarterback. Like, when you can get him off rhythm and you're constantly pressuring him, like, that's what happens. Now, on the opposite side, like, Florida State's offensive line, it's not a good offensive line. Like, they've had, and it's due to injury. They've had 3 different guys go down. Like, they've battled. But from the sense of what's the difference? Because this is the argument I heard going in. Like, well, Ohio State had a quarterback, third string, and Florida State has it. What's the difference? One, it was only 1 game that they got to see Ohio State. It was the Big Ten championship against Wisconsin, who at the time, which was funny, was ranked the exact same as Louisville, 14th. Ohio State won it 59-0. Like, it was a at the end of the day, they were like, well, they did not look like they missed him at all.
Yeah.
Like,
when JT Barrett went down, and then I don't even remember who the backup was.
Some white kid.
But then Cardell Jones came in and won him a national championship.
Yes, and they did not miss a beat. Like, there was, and that's like it's not as an argument used against Florida State. It's more saying, like, I understand how they put Ohio State in. Like, they did not look like a change of quarterback changed that team at all. On the other hand, when Jordan Travis left, that team was completely different. Like, Florida State, my dad said it. I was talking to him because we talk all the time about it. And he said, he was like, Florida State was that team at the beginning of the year. He's like, this is the year that someone who's like sort of unknown wins it. He's like, it's going to be Florida State. Like, if Florida State had that quarterback, it would have been. I really think that he's right on that. Like, they have Coleman. I forget what that other guy's name is, the big white dude. He's really good. Like, they had talent. They had the ability to win with the third string quarterback. Now, I get what you're about to say. You took away any ability for them to win it when you didn't put them into the playoff. Like, who knows? They could have been the Boise State. They could have showed up with a month more practice.
People also forget, like, yeah, they didn't look great against Louisville. But again, that was a third string quarterback. Their backup is okay now. He would have played throughout the playoff, which he is a lot better than the third string. That's right. That's why he's second string, right? So, like, I get that the conference championship didn't look super dominant because they only scored like 16 points against Louisville. But again, it was a third string quarterback who's not even going to play again. It's going to be the backup, right? Like, it seemed like they just honed in on like that one game only, and we're just like, oh, well, that's the defining thing.
And it's because of your point, and it's the best point I've heard, and I'll die on that hill. The committee did not expect Bama to win.
Yeah.
And when Bama won, it put them into a position where I think that they were unwilling, whether it's right or wrong. And this is why I brought up the loss thing. Both teams have a loss. At what point is the head-to-head win of Texas negated? That's
a very tough question to answer.
And I think it's impossible for people to answer.
Yeah. Like, at what level of competition did they have to lose to that then goes, well, you beating Bama doesn't really mean so much anymore because you lost to this team.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a tough question to
and
ask.
We don't have the answer to that. Like, in the college football right now.
Which, again, though, is why, like, we hate the way the committee does things, because when they lost to Oklahoma, what was Oklahoma? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, dude, Oklahoma's legit. They beat Texas. Who beat Alabama? Like, they were talking about old boy winning the Heisman and all that.
Gilbert.
So it's like, well, does their loss to Oklahoma, because Oklahoma was so good then, does that come into factor? Or is it like, oh, we just look at the end of the season and go, Oklahoma actually wasn't that good of a team, so now all of a sudden their loss looks worse. Like, what do you do? And the committee has shown on multiple occasions, it depends. They get to pick and choose when they lose versus like, oh, what's the end of this? And they do it all the time. All the time. They just decide, do we care about what the rankings were then, or do we care about the rankings are now? And when people use that argument all the time, oh, well, we beat 4 top 25 teams. Okay, one of them was Kentucky. Like, or like one of them was Texas A&M at the beginning of the year who, didn't win any game. Like, last year, I'm talking about. But they do it all the time. And it's like, we got to pick one. Like, we have to, as a committee, as a nation of a fandom, like, pick one. Does it matter what they're ranked now, or does it matter what they're ranked at the end? Like, but you can't have both, because you can't apply both all the time.
And this was such a year that I feel that I told my dad this on the phone. Outside of really like the top 8, everyone else was trash.
Yeah.
Like, the idea that somehow you valuing the Ole Miss win or the Penn State win more, who cares? Like, both of those teams showed that against the 2 teams that they lost to, for Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, for Ole Miss, Georgia, and Alabama, they were not in the same ballpark.
You could make an argument that the SEC and the Big Ten are the exact same conferences.
Yes.
You have 2 really good schools, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Bama. Everybody else is just riding coattails. Penn State is Ole Miss.
Penn State's LSU. Or vice versa this year.
They're the same conference. Like, you have that guy who's like, oh, look, everybody thinks they're so good, but they're just a resume builder for the 2 power teams that are going to win it.
And so this is why I sit back and go, same as you, we got to do away with the cupcakes. And it's not just Bama, it's not just Georgia, it's not just it's everyone. Everyone has cupcake games. You got to get rid of that. You have to say, look, you're going to play 8 conference games or 10 conference games a year, and then the 2 other games that you play are out of conference. And I think that what it should be is at least it shouldn't be like a shotgun effect. Like, if Ohio State plays Bama, then Ohio State also plays another SEC school. Like, that way you get to see just different levels.
Some good cross communication of schedules.
That's what the NFL does. And that's why the NFL's great when it comes time to playoffs, because at no point is anyone like, hey, the guy that's mid for Jacksonville, his name's just
Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence got hurt. I had to limp out of the stadium because they didn't have a cart for him. They're no longer in the first seed because quarterbacks. It's like it didn't matter.
Can I just say that game was like the football gods just being like, look, you idiots. Like, so one, Joe Burrow was out to start the game, right? So it's like, you've got a backup coming into the game. Cincinnati hasn't looked great. They've been kind of, mid all season. Jacksonville's like supposed to be this new, like, we're going to win the comp. They could have like jumped into the number 1 spot in the AFC.
And that's all they talked about was the fact that
Did Cincinnati lay down and fold?
Nope.
No, absolutely not, right? But then just in case the football gods are like, I don't know if everybody's quite getting what we're putting down here, Trevor Lawrence, he goes down. And the way the game was folding out, everybody's like, Cincinnati's already winning. Now you're putting in a backup for the Jags. This game's over. Cincinnati's got it in the bag. Nope. What's the backup do? Game-tying drive. Drives them down. Puts them into overtime. Holy cow. Hey, look, a backup can actually win you the game because it's a whole team sport, right? Now, I know Cincinnati ended up winning, but again, with the backup, right? Like that happening Monday night after all of the discussion on Sunday about like, oh, they can't win with a backup quarterback. That is like a divine intervention from the football gods of just being like, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
I agree.
7, what do they say? 4 of the top 7 teams in the AFC right now, I think are a backup quarterback.
Huh.
I think the only 3 that are healthy are Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and
Josh Allen. Because you got Jacksonville from the South. What's the other division? Oh, it's Kenny Pickett. Or whoever. No, that's Lamar. So you got Southwest, AFC East. So it would be Tua. So Tua. So the Bills aren't in the playoff picture.
Maybe.
Yeah. That's why.
That was a stat, though. And it's just like, again, there's a reason the NFL doesn't do it the way college football does it, because it's idiotic.
I'm not going to argue that point. And I'm not going to sit back and it's tough because I want to see Bama in. I agree with the logic of there has to be a reward for beating the number 1 team. Like beating a number 1 team is supposed to matter. Now, in my opinion, I know that you are probably not going to like this. I think that based upon schedules, the fact that Texas lost to a worse ranked opponent, you sit back and you go, Bama's in. Like I get that I get it. It's 1 loss. You shouldn't have lost to that team.
I'm not mad that Bama's in. I'm just more mad that Florida State's out. Right. Like, and again, I talked about it already of like the only discussion subjectivity wise that you could have made 100 different arguments should have been between Bama and Texas essentially, which again, that's where you have the head to head, what the loss means stuff, all that stuff could have been discussed and that's fine. But this is though where I will come back to, and I agree, I'm not disagreeing that the SEC has been the most dominant conference as of late. However, these are those things that happen that they then get to use as like, oh, well, see, we win all the national championships. It's like, well, yeah. If you put Bama in the CFP every single year.
Well, we're supposed to look at the past like this.
Well,
we're not supposed to see that.
Well, it's like you're giving them essentially false opportunities, right? Like, and I get it. The one year that I 100% to this day will say that Bama did not belong in the playoff, they ended up winning the national championship, right? That's beside the point. It's the fact that, like, if you give teams of that caliber an opportunity that they didn't deserve, of course they're going to succeed, right? You're giving them more opportunities. Does that mean the SEC is better? It doesn't mean that they're worse, but of course it's like stat padding. You know what I mean? Like we talked about it, Oklahoma, Boise State. If you play that game 10 times, Oklahoma's going to come out with more wins. I guarantee it. But I'm sorry, if you didn't make it the right way, you shouldn't then get to say, well, see, we're a better conference because we win national championships. Like, same thing with Ohio State. And again, I get it. The one year that they didn't belong, they won the Natty, right? So the committee's going to look back, use their circular logic, and be like, oh, see, we made the right decision. It's not about that. Like, it's not about that. It's about the teams who deserved it at the time to make it. Again, when you give these teams of that caliber those opportunities, they're going to take advantage of it. They're too good not to take advantage of it. That's not the point, though. Like, that's what I this and this is what's going to happen. I hope, and again, I'm married into a Georgia fan, right? Hopefully they don't watch the show, but I hope Florida State goes out and beats Georgia by 100. No chance that happens, right? Georgia's probably going to pummel them into the ground. And then everybody's going to go, oh, well, see, Florida State didn't belong. That's the stupidest logic I've ever heard. You cannot use that logic to say that they didn't belong in the playoffs.
You cannot use bowl games to justify
I mean, like,
anything.
it just give me a break here.
No, I'm telling you right now, no athlete on that team cares that it's the Orange Bowl.
And if you're comparing TCU to Florida State right now, again, another absolute ridiculous comparison. Not even the same thing, not even close.
You're correct. So, I mean, we talked a lot about the CFP and their misgivings. Anything left on the CFP, or do you want to go right to the games that happened?
I think I got all my points across. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change it. It's just like I just think what they did is I'm not going to use the word travesty because everybody's been using it, and I think that's an overused word. It's not right. What they did, however you want to look at it, they got it wrong. It's not about the 4 best teams because we've proven that
they didn't follow the rules they had used all year long up until that point.
It's just what they did was period dot wrong. They did not get it right. I don't care what the outcome is at the end of this. They got it wrong.
I would agree. And if people doubt me, he can back me up. My prediction was Michigan, Washington, Florida State, Texas. That's what I thought. I got it on text message saying like that's how I thought the committee was going to vote. I thought that Florida State winning, the only chance that we really had was Florida State losing. I thought they were going to put the 3 undefeated in. It was going to be a toss-up between Bama and Texas, and they were going to say, well, head-to-head, Texas in.
Because that's what it should have happened.
That's how I thought it was going to go. But there it is.
And then you have me on text message saying there's no way that the committee does that because they're all idiots.
Yeah. We did say that.
Pops can attest as well.
Oh, my goodness. From the conference championship games, just to break to those for just really quick, we already mentioned this once. Like, I don't think anyone was shocked Bama won. I think people were surprised. But it's like, if you had said, hey, Nick Saban wins this game, people are not, like, blown away. On the other hand, I don't think really anyone gave Washington a chance. Like, I don't think anyone walked into that game going, Washington's going to win this game.
When Vegas put them in a 9.5 point, I mean, that was disrespectful.
Yes.
Disrespectful. Now, I picked Bama, but I also picked Oregon, right? So, I mean, again, like, I picked Washington to cover because I thought 9.5 was an absolute disrespectful line, but.
And Washington came. The thing that's surprising me is I think that Penix is a better quarterback than Daniels when he's hot. Like when Penix is playing really well, like he slings it. However, even in that's the thing that gives me pause for Washington. I guess we can sort of give like some previews of what's about to happen in the CFP. Hopefully you're able to make it back before the CFP happens. We can like give a whole show about the CFP. I have pause with Washington playing Texas. Texas's defensive line is really good. He missed guys. Like there was a pass on the sideline that he missed a wide open guy. It would have put him up by 21. I think at that point it really would have like never given Oregon hope. Oregon came back and made the game in the second half. But just like we know from playing, like there are just momentum shifts. Like you score in that position, you get about 3 scores. Like teams start to lay down. They're just like, dude,
Oklahoma State did it.
Yeah.
You watched Oklahoma. There were dudes jogging in the middle of the Oklahoma State defense. They were just like,
you'll never be able to convince me. Oklahoma State lost that game before they ever stepped on the field. Because you watched some of those, like, dude, you just saw it like wide receiver screens. I was like, dude, this dude is jogging. Like, guys are just like, you brought it up with the angle.
The one guy caught the ball, and the defender was standing right next to him, and he was like moving backwards. It's not like he had like momentum in it. He was like flat-footed, caught the ball, and the defender was like, nah, I missed him.
Dude, it was disrespectful to even play the game. Like and the sad part about it is that's the only Oklahoma State I know. Like, I don't care how good I think I even said at the beginning of the year, like, no matter how good Oklahoma State's supposed to be, when they lose games, they lose them.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like they did against UCF. Like, a terrible performance. And somehow they managed to hang on the last 2 weeks. But Texas won the game. Texas looked great. The question for Texas is, and I think for Texas to win the Natty, they do the exact same thing they did against Bama and the exact same thing they did against Oklahoma State. If you can give Ewers time, he's going to tear people up.
Well, and I think the one thing they've got going for them is that Washington's defense is not super solid. If the rankings were kind of switched around a little bit, I think Texas struggles with an Alabama or a Michigan from a defensive side of the ball. Like, they're not going to just be able to throw these little bubble screens and get away with 14, 15 yards every single time, which that's what they were able to do against Oklahoma State. I feel like that's probably what they're going to be able to do.
Vegas has them as a 5.5 point favorite. Texas.
They're probably going to do the same thing to Washington.
The question for can Washington? I think if they get into a boat race, Washington can win that.
Yeah,
just because
sure.
they've lived on that the whole year. Like they've won the games against UFC, against Oregon. Like Washington knows
that's how
to
they
score
like
quick.
to play the game. Yeah.
Yes. So they'll just take the opportunistic, like, hey, if our defense can just get a pick, get a few stops, like, and we can just build a 2-score lead, we'll keep it throughout the game.
Yeah.
Like that's what they did against Oregon. On the other side of Alabama, Michigan, to me, like, I know that I'm like the most self-deprecating Bama fan. It's not that. It's more just like, I understand I went into it and I said the biggest challenge for Bama was their offensive line. Hadn't played good all year. That was the best offensive line performance I've seen out of Bama, bar none, the whole year.
And can we not overlook the fact that at some point during this year, Jalen Milroe was benched?
Yeah.
Benched.
I saw this thing, and I 100% believe that this is why Saban's a genius.
I mean, he looks fantastic right now. Like, he's the reason they won that game.
So you hear me out. Everyone has said that, this is like some next level Saban thinking. Saban benches Milroe. Knows that Milroe's their guy, but benches them against an inferior opponent that he knows, even with my backup, I'm going to win this game. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the number 2 guy and the number 3 guy to show that you don't want either one of those guys on the field because they're terrible. So much so that for the rest of the year, when I put in this guy, you're never going to say he should be on the bench. I don't want to hear another word about this guy.
But it's going to be enough kick in the pants to look at Milroe and be like,
step it up.
Yeah, you better keep playing, or otherwise, this is what's going to happen.
And the same thing I said happened at the beginning of the year after the Texas game. I've said this so many times. The last thing teams wanted was for Bama to not lose again.
Oh yeah,
like for Bama to continually. This is the Bama that's won championships.
Exactly right. Like, and this is what I'm talking about. Like, nobody ever wants to face Bama, right? Because I don't care what kind of performance they've got going on that year. You're scared, like, because they can beat you regardless of who you think they are. Like, if Saban is on that sideline, they got a chance to win.
Yep, and they've shown it. Like, I know I sent it to you and Pops. That reaction by Michigan, I was like, I don't know if anyone's seen. If you haven't, go watch it.
See, I don't know. I think they're making a little.
I think that they really thought they were going to get Florida State.
Yeah, and I don't know if the reaction was like oh gosh, we got to play Bama, or if it was kind of like me where you were just like, oh my God, they left Florida State out. Like, and I don't know. I don't know what the reaction is. I think they're making it a little bigger than it should, but I get the joke behind it, right? Because I'd be doing the same thing. Like, no, we're supposed to be the number 1 team in the nation. We got to play Bama. Like, we lost to TCU last year. We got to play Bama now.
I understand. Like, it'd be great. It's sad because
speaking of, back to the Texas-Washington game. I mean, Washington kind of got screwed as well. Where's the game at? It's down in Louisiana.
Yeah,
right. They got to go. They're the number 2 team in the nation, and they're rewarded with an away game, basically in Texas's backyard.
This is not a fear of Texas. I'm going to explain this. I am pulling hard for Washington to win. The game's in Houston. I want to go.
Okay.
I've been to 2 national championships both times we lost.
Oh,
I've been in person.
Well, why do you care if Washington wins?
Because the national championship is in Houston.
So who do you because you don't want Texas to have a home game?
Well, it'd be more expensive ticket because Texas fans could just drive. It's the same thing. I don't know if you saw that stat. Holly, it was funny. She was like, "You want to go to the SEC championship?" I was like, "Do I want to go? Yeah. Can I afford to go? Yeah. No." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, I pulled out the stat. The cheapest ticket to get in the SEC championship was like $580.
That's actually not as bad as I thought it would be.
If you took all the other conference championship games, the cheapest to get in the stadium, added them all together, and then double it, it was still less.
Oh my goodness!
Than the SEC championship. Like that, like you could have gotten to the Pac-12 championship. I think it was like for $44.
Wow!
And I was sitting there, I was like, God, like I get it's going to be a national ticket's going to be hard to get no matter what. If Texas is there, I'll set it. I've already told Holly I'll just sit on the couch and watch it because I remember the year that Bama played Georgia in the Natty here. Came home from the deployment, was sitting there, and I was like, I'm going to go to this game. I want to watch this game. What was the cheapest ticket to get into the stadium? in the bins, upper deck. It was the very top row in the stadium. What was the ticket cost?
$1,200.
Nope. $2,700 post fees. And I looked at Holly. I was like, "Where's that baby? Ain't no way." Like, you guess I watch now.
How are these people going to these games?
Okay, I want to bring this up. I want to talk about this again, but I do want to emphasize this. This is the thing that I hate about the 12-team playoff. Just hear me out, and then we can wrap this up. I know it's a long episode for you guys listening. The very first round of games will be played at the highest ranked opponent's home.
Yeah.
Which is great. Like, I love that. But then you go down to, the next round of 8 teams before then you go down to 4 to the Natty. All of those games
neutral sites
are neutral sites. Yeah. And for a fan, like, that is expensive. Like, because a lot of times if you don't drive, like, airfare for you, like, let's say either you and your buddy or you and your wife go, $2,000. Because you got to buy the ticket late. Like, you just don't know when you're going. Like, then you got to go get a hotel room. I remember when we went to California, we stayed on base at Travis. It was great. It was like $60 a night. The cheapest hotel in San Jose was $1,200 a night.
Shocker.
And then the tickets are to get into a game and actually have, like, good seats. It's about $1,000 a ticket. Like, how is a fan supposed to be able? I don't care if it's banned. Like, I don't care who your team is. Like, USC hasn't been in the playoff. Like, to be able to go watch them, and it's like, even if you have money, to the idea of being like, I'm going to go watch them play the first game, then I'm going to go watch them. If they had the bye, play that game, the next game, and the Natty, it's like, dude, you're out $50,000 to $100,000. Like, to answer your question, who's affording that? Like, that's why it's like, I feel bad for Bama fans, like the true people that love to go to the games. It's because, like, when you're good that many years, it's like you get to go once. And it's like, hopefully they win because you dropped a ton of money to go watch them.
Yeah.
But it's tough. Like, and that's why, like, for Washington, Texas this year, it'll be great for them. Washington hasn't been in since they played us and got beat in the bins. Texas has never been in. So both of those fan bases, like, I fully expect the game in New Orleans to be a minimum of 80% Texas fans.
Probably.
Like, Texas, because they'll drive. Like, they'll drive. Like, and there's enough people that live on the border, like Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, all those Texas fans, they'll drive.
Yeah.
And it's New Orleans. Who doesn't want to go to New Orleans? Like, for a Bama fan or Michigan fan, having to go all the way to Pasadena, which I get it. It was storied stadium. Holly asked me, she's like, "You want to go to that?" I was like, "Absolutely not." I was like, LA's expensive as it is. I don't even want to know how much I'd spend there. Like, I'd love to go, but it's never going to happen. So, but that's a lot for a college episode.
It was necessary, though.
It was good. I'm glad that we had it. As I said, it's for sure our longest episode. I can already tell by the time on the screen right now. But I think it was like the most. I knew that coming into this after the rankings, it's literally, I told Holly this, where I'm watching the phone, Alabama pops up, I'm like, oh yeah, and she's like, what, Brandon, get in? I go, yeah, and I go, and you know what, this is going to be the best episode ever, because I know that it was just going to create a lot. So, anything else?
I wasn't shocked. Like, I mean, I think right before the rankings came out, I texted you, and I said, this is what's going to happen, and I called it. I called 1 through 4. Spot on. I said I knew that, so I wasn't shocked. Doesn't mean I'm
upset.
I'm not upset about it.
Anything else before we shut it down?
Nope. Appreciate you guys watching.
Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you next week. Time to pull chalks.